I invite Bindu Rana. Dr. Bindu Rana was many years a director of Educational Research Institute in Yedukomp and created many different methodologies for many different schools. One of those are Millennium Schools, known in India. Created more than 880 books, can you imagine? Of different kinds, on different methodologies. When I saw her work and understood what she did, I was so impressed. And I would like her to share with us that journey. Please, Bindu. Would you like to be?
No, can I be heard without this? No?
We are recording.
Okay.
I can clip you if you like.
Yeah, that'll be better because then I can move around. No worries. Can you all hear me clearly now? Yes. I'm loud and clear. So, namaskar. Thank you, Vladimir, for giving me this opportunity to be here. Completely my pleasure. Just before I begin, I just want to clarify something that I'm not going to be speaking on philosophy. I'm not too much aware of the Aurobindo way of doing things except for whatever Vladimir has taught me in the last few years. I'm going to take you through a journey that I have personally gone through. And in this journey that I have gone through, it's not going to be a Bollywood movie kind of a thing. It's going to be related to education and the kind of work that I have done in the last 14 years. The practical, pragmatic, day-to-day challenges that we encountered, on the ground is what I would like to share with all of you, if that is fine, without the philosophy and without the theology and things like that. So let me begin with the concept that many years ago I was here at another conference and I thought I had done a decent job of presenting myself. And at the end of my session, everybody said, "Oh, nice, that was nice. We'd like to talk to you later." And I was feeling very proud of myself. And then there stood Vladimir at the end of the session, and he sort of put his hand up and said, "All this work is fine. But where is the unity of the soul in this work?" And that was an awakening moment, Vladimir. Thank you so much for that question, because it led me onto a journey that said, oh my God, here I think I've done these kind of things. To give you a background, my job is to set up schools. I've set up personally 50 schools in the country. This year I have set up 8 more. The plan is to build up another 25 by 2018. I have personally been involved in setting up learning systems. I have created 820 books. You could go on the web and check these out, but that's not the point here. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the search. I want to talk about what led to what it is. So I'm going to take you through a journey which has been very fulfilling, but at the same time very wanting more. So the more I knew, I realized the less I knew, if that makes any sense, okay? And so while I ran an R&D, which was about some 300 people worked with me at that point of time. And in that R&D, our focus was, how do we bring education into India? So if you forget this slide, I take you to look at India. Who exists in India? Who are the kids that we're trying to educate? How do you look at these kids? How do you look at the aspirations of parents? What is it that the parents can afford to do? Somebody asked a very pertinent question and said, sorry, but I'm going out of context, that how much fees do you charge? That's practicality of life. While we discuss philosophy, we cannot ignore the practical aspects of life. It reminds me of the Dehi and Daha. You know, while we talk of all of us are united by a certain soul or the Atma or the Paramatma or the consciousness or whatever words that we use, we all have intellect, buddhi, we all have manas, we all have emotions, we all have intellect, you know, all 5 senses. We talk of it in every conference. But each one of us is so uniquely different. So while we want to end our journey or begin our journey by saying that we're all united, we're the same, we're definitely not united. I'm sorry for saying this. We're definitely not the same here. Because each one of us here from our bodily consciousness is very different. I'm sure the philosophers here and the Aurobindo Ashram people would be scandalized about, but that's been my experience. So my journey was that while in my classroom, every child who entered was very dramatically different, how do I take this difference to maybe the Dehi? How do I build this into a unity of what Vladimir asked me that question? So that's the journey. The journey was that how do I divide this lot of children? So when I looked at India, I did a behavioral economics of things. And the economics was very, very simple. That India today can have different layers of schools. You can have 5 different layers of schools in India. Right? So you have budget schools, you have the middle level schools. These are all based on simple aspect of socio-economic range. Therefore, that question was very critical. How much do they pay? And what is it that we do with these kind of children who come to us? Right? So once we looked at this, I realized it was so similar to the Maslow's hierarchy. Why was it similar? Because if I will take you through why this is similar. So just look at how the self-actualization also is connected to a large extent to the socio-demography and the socio-economic needs of the people. Right? So while he spoke of, I don't want to be in poverty, so he went out of poverty to search for something and may have then realized self-actualization. Right? So let's look at the 3 stakeholders of education. Who are the 3 key stakeholders of education? The parent, of course. The parent has a certain need. And there is this very big myth that schools are for children. I'm breaking this myth. Schools are actually based for parents and their needs because children are not decision makers. They don't decide at the age of 4 or 5 which school they are going to go to. It is the parent who chooses the school for the child. So please remember, your first stakeholder in any education is the parent. Second, student, of course. And third, the facilitator, the teacher, the guru, whatever terminology you want to use. Right? So I'm going to take you through the 3 stakeholders and what each one of them really we went through. We did a research. I'm sharing that research with you. Look at the 5 schools and look at teachers in all these 5 schools. What kind of teachers, what kind of parents are there in each of these schools? So I hope everybody understands Hindi here. Does it? Not everybody. Okay, so anyway, I'll take you through a video and it's a little bit in Hindi and I'll do the translation for you. I hope it opens. There is no sound. Okay, so we leave it. So I'll take you through. So we did an interview of about 300 parents at this budget school level. When I say budget school level, these are parents who are living below poverty line or they're just about at the rate of a poverty line, just above it. Right? So the first question we threw, and we threw the same question to the 5 layers of parents here. The first question we threw to parents is, what is your expectation of a school? Very simple question. What is an expectation from a school for you? And what was really amazing and what was really astounding was this layer, there were only 3 aspirations they had. The first aspiration was that my child should go to a school which can give him a job. Basic needs. We're coming back to Maslow's hierarchy. That I don't care about the best of education. I don't care about the best learning methodology or the best guru that you're bringing into my classroom. At the end of the schooling, whatever little money that I am spending to send to a school, my child should be able to get a job. Very simple, basic need was answered. We move to the second layer, the middle level schools. That is the time when parents are a little ambitious. You know, they earn a little bit of money, and that is the time they feel that children should be educated. Do you know why? The reason they want their child to be educated is because they don't want their child to go through the same pitfall that they went into. So the first reaction was, what do you expect from a school at this layer? And this reaction was that, of course, my child should get a job, but my child should get a government job. You see the difference? Sense of security, a sense of being, their position. That means my child should be able to get a positional job somewhere. Move to the third layer, higher middle level schools. And this was the most astonishing research we did. This is the layer where parents are brand conscious. Which clothes do you wear? I wear branded stuff. Which school does your child go to? The top 5 in the country, or the top 1 in my city. Why do they do this? Can you see the difference of layers of aspirations that are growing up here? So what is this brand all about? This brand is about social consciousness, and not consciousness in the term that Aurobindo would have thought of it. It's a brand consciousness, right? So when we ask them, what is this brand consciousness? Why do you want your child to go to a brand school? Because it matters. I stay in society, and what others perceive of me is what is important than what I perceive of myself, right? And then you moved to the upper levels, parents, and you ask them this question, what is your expectation of school? And their expectation is, all this is passé. It's just there. I mean, these are mandatory things. I mean, we're not going to focus on it. My child should get an international exposure. So if you look at each parent, what we realized was the parental expectation and the challenges that we were facing. There were similarities in those 5 layers. The similarity was that every parent, from the budget school to the high end, wanted the child to be educated in English language. Macaulay has left us, but English is not really left. It's the uniting factor between it. What is it that every parent wanted? Bacha confident ho. Means he should be able to have some kind of confidence. And then, of course, values. This was a common element that we found. What we found different among all parents was job versus attitude. So at the higher end, parents said, I don't mind sending my child to the best cooking institute in the world. But if you asked a poor maid or you asked a poor lady that, your child has an aptitude for actually cooking, would you like him to become a chef? And she'd be aghast. She would be like, I'm spending my hard-earned money to make him a cook. It's all about perception. It's about looking At the same thing, while you had the high-end parent who looked at you and said, yeah, my kid has the ability, I have the money to send him to the best Swiss, school in the world and let him become the chef, and I will open a hotel for him at the end of it. Right. So very interesting research that emerged. So while you're struggling to find the right education system because you want to make sure that every stakeholder in the system has a win-win situation, how do you handle this? What do you do? Where is it that you bring a right education for the parent? Let's move to the next slide. Let's look at children who come to us. So like I said, I helped establish budget schools. I set up 13 budget schools, which are in the most back of beyond areas in India. Okay, this is a place in Haryana, which is mostly inhabited by the Muslims. And not a single girl child, the first school that we set up, 3 of the schools, not a single girl child ever came to the school. And the reason they said was that girls don't get educated. So I still remember when I was walking down the street one day in that village, and the car broke down. My car broke down, and I had to get down of the car, and I saw 3 young, pretty girls working in their village house outside. So out of curiosity, while the car puncture was being set up, I asked the girls, I said, oh wow, so do you guys go to school? And they said, no. I said, okay, so one was 13, one was 9, and one was 6, I think. Oh, something like that. So I said, okay, none of you go to school? I said, no, none of us go to school. So, but our brother goes. So how old is your brother? My brother is 4 years old. Right. So it was very critical for the brother to go to school and the girls not to go to school. So the kind of children who came to us at the budget school, finally when we opened these schools, we realized that they were first generation learners. They had absolute no exposure. They would come to school thinking that they're going to get a reward, because the government has a project called Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, where they provide free meals to motivate children to come to schools. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but the government of India works on this. They don't look at quality of schools. They look at how to lure children into school, but how not to sustain them there. So there is this concept of a free meal. So when we started the school, the first thing they thought was that they're going to get a free meal inside our schools, which was absolutely not the thing. Most of them would come not even had a bath, or the dress would be crumpled. They haven't brushed their teeth. They're not even wearing shoes. So we faced so we were looking at, are you going to teach them literacy skills, or are you going to teach them hygienic skills? So we were caught in that particular aspect of things. At the next layer were the children. What we did, we found a research here. This layer of children are the most stressed out layer in this country. This is the lot that parents focus on the 99% in the board exams. That every child here, if you have achieved a 90%, you're a failure. But if you have achieved a 95, you're brilliant, because nowadays every child gets an 80% or an 85%, right? So this layer had the maximum number of suicides in this range. Children dropped out of school, had stress issues, had psychological problems, and of course committed suicide. Because this is the layer that parents stress a lot on, education, the education that we think. Of course, high stress level. Then a layer above that, look at the children we have here. I call this the ye dil mange mo. The ye dil mange mo in Hindi, actually in English, means this heart keeps wanting more. So I have an iPhone 5. Tomorrow I need an iPhone 6. And of course, I need an iPhone 7 now, and I need an iPhone 8 by the next year that comes. everything becomes redundant even before you've tasted it. This is the generation who sits in your classroom and the teacher is teaching in her conventional manner to a group of children who have the latest gadgets and have the latest things in this house. Do you think these children are ever going to sit in your classrooms or even be attentive to what the so-called best facilitator has to say? So, look at the kind of kids we have. Go up the ladder. What is the kind of kids we have here? Completely bored. Completely bored because they, at their homes, are stuffed with things before they even open their mouth. That is why in the papers every day you hear a 18-year-old taking his best dad's mark and ramming it on somebody. He's driving an Audi and it's hit somebody. This is the actual reality. This is what we encountered. Let's move to the next one. What did we find common in these similarities? What were the similarities in these age groups between top to bottom? We found the EQ, developmental milestones, styles of learning, all your psychological elements of your manas, and everything is there. What is different in this lot? It's the drive, the exposure, the environment in which they are, the resources that they've been given are different, the skill level, and of course, that depends on how good your teacher has been to nurture you, which is a rare case anyway in today's times, right? And I'm not talking of Orwell when I say that. All right, let's look at teachers. What are the kind of teachers that come to this school at the budget layer? What are these teachers that actually visit you? They have absolutely no exposure. They're absolutely sitting there waiting for just getting a government job, which means that if I can get a government job, I don't need to do a private job, which means I don't have to go to school, which means there's no accountability to me, to my learning or what I do, which means in India today, all those who apply at the government jobs and don't turn up in schools are basically from this layer. Right? So what I'm trying to just tell you is these are the challenges that some of us faced. At the middle layer, what is this? So I had an interesting case of a teacher at this layer. If you sort of allocate it, so the CBSE, there is a board, a statutory board in India, which all our schools are affiliated to, gives you a certain number of periods that a teacher is supposed to do. So you have, let's say, between 28 to 32 working number of periods that the teacher must do. Now, if you make that into 33, the teacher gets into a union and revolts. That is not my job. As per the rule, I have to do an X amount, therefore I will only do an X amount. It cannot be an X plus something, right? So this is the kind of layers we found at this layer. At the higher level, what did we find? Very qualified, very open to learning, trying to understand things because they come from a brand school. And just that they are associated to a brand gives them a high deal of confidence. I teach at X school. The whole body and the attitude language is very different here. But along with that comes a baggage. What is the baggage? I know it all. Right? Don't try and teach me. Which means I belong to this brand, and if I've got into this brand, obviously there has to be a reason for why I've got into it. And therefore, don't try and teach me what to do. Right? So this is the layer. And of course, you have the upper level. This is also your I know it all. I'm not going to take you too long into all of this because I know I'll run out of time if I go into this kind of stuff. So what did we have? We had teachers, we have students, and we have children. Parents, sorry. This, ladies and gentlemen, was our challenge. How do you bring it into a unity? How do you bring it and say that everybody is equal and that everybody must have a particular kind of system, or that everybody must follow a particular concept? That was our challenge. So the more research we did, the more I realized that we had a wall against us. But we never gave up. We said we have to do something about it. So what was our implementation challenges with the teachers? They had degrees, but they didn't have ability. They had creativity, but they would not conform, which means the teachers who were good, who we felt were creative and would really do a good job, which was just a handful, which was just about 5 or 10 out of 500. That's the ratio. I once went for an interview in Odisha. I had set up a school there. So we had set out an ad for teachers. I got some 300 applications, of which 50 of them were PhDs, of which at least 30 to 40 had done triple masters in a particular subject, and they all came for an interview. Take a guess how many we hired. We had to hire about 22 teachers. How many do you think we hired out of the 300, 400 things we got? 2, 5? Take a guess. There was just one, sir. You were quite near. We could just hire one. This is what our education system has done to us.
Can you explain why?
Why? So what happened? They had 4 masters but couldn't communicate 3 lines. Their language ability was 0. Right? If you ask them where they got their degrees from, either half of them were fake, or someone had written the exam for them, or they just wrote, learned, and went and gave the exam. Ask them, how did you get your PhD? Ma'am, I applied to so-and-so university, and that university sir said, you copy somebody's PhD and do it. This is education in our country. We had just one teacher, and believe me, even that teacher, we just took her for a front office executive, so that if any parent came in, she was the only one who could speak decently well. This is the kind of ratio, and this is the kind of challenges. And here I am with a dream of opening hundreds of schools in the country. and how do you do it? You don't have manpower to do it. You don't have resources. You may have the building to do it. Somebody said we are okay with the building. But where do I get people to be inside the classes to do this? So this is India. This is real India. While we sit in Auroville, we can talk about taking teachers to a higher levels. These are the day-to-day challenges that we face. So keeping this in mind, we did this research in 6 or 8. This was an old, outdated research, I would say, because if I do something today, it'll be again dramatically different. But the whole idea was, so it reminds me of a story. Would you like to hear a story? And it's a mythological story. It's not a real story. So it reminds me of a story of Vishnu sitting in his court one day, and he's resting, and Narad comes. I hope some of you know who Narad is. Narad is a protagonist in our Indian mythology, which actually conveys a message. But he's always the devil's advocate. He always provokes, so to take out a story. And Vishnu, of course, is the sustainer and the god of ours, who is there to sustain the world. So Vishnu's sitting in his court, and Narad comes in, and Narad is really angry. And Narad tells Vishnu, I'm so upset with you. So he says, why are you upset with me? So he says, every day when I speak, and Narad had a fashion of speaking, where every sentence he said, Narayan, Narayan. Narayan is another name for Vishnu, which means that every time he said something, he always used the word Narayan. So he said, every day I talk and I chant your name thousands of times. And yet outside the temple today, I notice that you haven't put my statue. There's a statue of another follower of yours, Garud. Now, Garud is another character in the Hindu mythology, which is half man and half bird. Right? So, I wish I had the picture, I would have shown it to you. But, so he's a fan of Vishnu, he's a follower of Vishnu. So he said, how dare you have Garud's statue outside your temple? I'm really upset with you after all the worshipping I do and all the, the prayers I do for you, and you sort of keep his statue. So while he's saying this, suddenly there's a huge noise outside the palace. And so Vishnu tells Narad, can you go outside and check what's happened? So Narad wants to make his boss happy. So he goes out and he comes back and he says, oh, a lady fell down. So Vishnu looks at him and says, a lady fell down and it made so much noise? Find out why it made so much noise. So he goes back outside and he comes back running after a minute and he says, oh, the lady was carrying 2 pots. And, one of her pot fell down, that's the noise. So he said, what was the pot carrying? He says, I don't know. He says, go and find out. So again, Narad goes out to find out and comes back and he says, oh, you know what? The pot was carrying milk. He says, really? How did the pot fall? He says, I don't know. So again, Narad goes out to find out, comes back and he says, oh, she tripped on something. So then I can hear her crying. Why is she crying? He says, I don't know. So this continued. Every few minutes, he would go back and he would come back, and every time Vishnu asked him a question, he said, I don't know. And suddenly, while this was happening, Garud walked into the room and he bowed down to his master and said, Master, you look troubled. Is there something I can do for you? He said, yes, please go and find out what happened outside. So Garud goes outside, comes back after 2-3 minutes and says, Master, there was a woman who was walking by, and while she had 2 pots in her hand. While she was walking by, she saw a rope. She thought the rope was a snake. She got scared and she tripped over it and she fell and one of her pots broke. And, she's crying right now because she doesn't have the money now to feed her children because the larger pot has broken. So what do we do? And she's howling and crying and saying that this happened in the court of Vishnu. Therefore, I'm even more upset. But don't worry, Master. I have gone and told her not to worry. You're in the court of Vishnu. Vishnu will take care of your needs. It's a matter of 1 pot, and he will repay you for it. So 2 people looking at the same situation. You had Narad and you had Garud. One was a follower who we call Karyakarta, which means you are a follower. You're a blind follower, where you don't use your brains. The other one is also a follower, but we call him a Karyakarta. A Karta, sorry, not a Karyakarta. The first one's a Karta. What does that mean? He's being proactive, he's thinking, he's analyzing, he's critically looking at the situation, and he's looking at things. What do you think we do in our classrooms today? Are we creating Narads or are we creating Garuds? We're creating total Narads in our classrooms, and that is the challenge we have. How do we shift from creating Narads to creating Garuds in our classroom? And that's the challenge I felt we needed to take up. The shift from Narad to Garud. So based on that, we created learning systems adaptable for each of these needs. That to us has been a journey, a phenomenal journey for us, and especially for me. I can't say that we've achieved even half of the journey, but we're in the progress. We're sort of looking at how we did it. So let me give you an example of what we did.
How many people in your team?
Sorry?
How many people in your team, roughly?
So at one point of time, I had, like I said, 300, but each one of them worked on different things. So in some places we had about 30, some places we had about 25, some places we had about... So there were projects differing, and depending on that, we took up people, depending on their skill set, their mindsets, etc. So let's look at the first, for the budget schools. What were the kind of people we had in the budget schools? We had children who were first generation. We had parents who wanted children only to do schooling because they wanted a job. And you had teachers at this level who were absolutely unexposed to something. This was our target audience that we had. So what did we do? We created a system called the scaffolding learning system, which is scaffolding, like it said, it builds the base. Unless you, and what is scaffolding? It's the pillars, the things on which this building is actually sitting on. An architect would know that. Scaffold. Go layer by layer, go step by step, take each step as it comes. So we built a system called the scaffolding learning system, and this scaffolding learning system also became sustainable life skill from class 6th onwards, which means it remained SLS, but the terminology changed. So what was it? This was a remedial program that we created for children who didn't, even in class 3, know how to write their name. We got children who couldn't even understand an alphabet but were promoted to grade 3 in government schools. Right? This is real India. So what did we do? We created a program for them. And at the class 6th onwards, we created a, like I said, sustainable life skill, where we created a little industry inside the school, which meant that these children were learning history, geography, math, science through the skills, through the small-scale industries of their own village. Right? So which meant that these children, if you had, they were doing an agarbatti, you know agarbatti that you get sold here, right? Essence sticks. So we created an essence stick industry inside the classroom where children created it, which meant that they had to learn language through the essence sticks, which means they had to create advertisements, they had to create adjectives, which means they had to learn adjectives because the advertisement needed adjectives. They learned grammar through it. They learned sort of other advertising modes of it, through which language got learned. And we did this in English and Hindi. We taught them math. How did we teach them math? We said, so a certain amount of essence comes to you, how many sticks would one cost, how much calculation do you have to do? So we taught them profit and loss, we taught them fractions, we taught them percentages, all through the small-scale industry that we set up. Right? So we taught them science. We said, where do you think this builds? Where do you think the essence thing comes from? Would it be feasible in another country? Why is it not feasible in another state? So the whole curriculum built up around this. So what did we do? We catered to the parents' need that even if this child dropped out at 8th or 9th, he had the skill to get a job. Right? That was our intention, that you matched expectation with reality. Yet, teach children the way they learn. So while you're fulfilling parents' aspiration, you're teaching it the way children learn. And then what did we do with the teachers? That was an interesting journey we had. I created, which is also an online teacher training program. If any of you are interested, you can ask me for login IDs. I'd be happy to provide it to you. So a teacher in a village generally would walk for miles to come to a school, which means she has to get onto a bus, she has to get onto a car, and come to a school. And she has no time to actually go through her lesson plan or to understand how she has to structure a classroom. So we created online teacher training modules. These are made by little puppets. Is there an internet here? I would have shown the online program. If it's not, it's okay. I'll give you an access to it. You can have a look at it. So it's an online program which shows little puppets doing methodology in the classroom. Right? And the beauty of it is that the teacher can watch it on her smartphone. It need not be an expensive phone. It's just a handheld device, any normal smartphone, and she can just plug it on and in her bus see it while she's coming to school. So that's what we devised for teacher training. And we also motivated her and we also put her into an incentive scheme because money matters to them. Which meant that if you followed X amount of things that we had taught you, the ones that we are doing online, if you applied these in your class, we would give you a certain percentage of an increase in your salary, which motivated her to sort of do those things in her classroom and to also make sure that she's certified. Now, I know a lot of you will accuse me of saying that, how can you monetize it? Education is not based on monetization. I've got a lot of these criticisms from great people saying that, but it actually worked for us. It brought in a huge difference in the way the teacher taught and the way the parents were happy with us at the end of it, right? So this was one of the systems that we had. No? Not coming. It doesn't matter. Let it be. No worries. So this was the second system. The third system that we had, the second system that we had, was a very interesting journey, and that, Vladimir, came from that question that you asked me. So while I had created this learning system, and I had already created another learning system, which you will eventually see, this system went through a huge experiential learning for me as a person and as my own growth. Every time I looked at the content, for example, when I looked at the books that we had created, so every time I spoke to my team, I said, there is a soul missing. The book has no soul. It is beautiful, it is graphic, it has all the activities that children need to do. But what is the soul that is missing? And after a lot of debate and things like that, the soul that emerged from my so-called researchers was, I think we should put some value education in it. So we got ourselves limited and trapped into believing that the soul equals to value lessons inside a book. So we did put it. We put value. It's in every chapter. Value is integrated, and it is not taught because we believe values are not taught. It is caught. The way the teacher talks in a class, the culture of the school, the way it is exhibited, or where the parents talk to you, this is culture. This is values. It is not taught, right? But we integrated it into the learning system. The point that would interest all of you, and I want to focus on this is the middle level school parents who wanted to get into the next layer. These are the second generation, no exposure children who are the most stressed out, who come to us at nursery with parents' expectation of saying, why can't my child write sentences? 3-year-old. Okay, I've had grandparents who come up to me and say, we moved our child, you charge us more, and still my child can't speak English. Barely 3 weeks in the school. Right? So this is the kind of expectation that they have from a pre-primary child. So if we taught one nursery rhyme less than the other school, which meant that you're not delivering. And if you didn't teach the nursery rhyme that they learnt in their school, for example, the Humpty Dumptys and, Twinkle Twinkle and the Ring of Roses, the ancient old session that we had, we were not good enough. Right? So what do you do to that kind of system? So this is where I created a program called the Edict learning system. Now, if you look inside a classroom, you have a learner and you have a facilitator, right? How does learning happen? Learning is not linear. Learning is not from one point to another point, right? Learning is like a whirlwind. As you start off, you take off on a journey. And that journey is an amazing journey because the same thing expands. It doesn't end. There is no end point in learning, right? So we created what we call the spiral. This is a trademark of ours. And this trademark actually stands for the Edict learning. What does E stand for? E stands for EQ. I always believe there has to be EQ before IQ. IQ, the most overrated quotient that we've ever heard of in our life. Right? So, if in a classroom you have not hooked your child in 30 seconds, you've lost your child for the next 30 minutes. Do you believe that? How many of you are educationists here? What do we do in our classrooms to do that? So here walks in a teacher. Good morning, everybody. Take out your books. We're going to be studying on something. Do you think EQ has happened?
You know what I do?
Yeah.
I enter and they know now I'm clapping. So they get aware I'm there, I'm in front of them, and they can only start doing the same. We have to identify. And then I move, they do the same. Ha ha ha, we are great. And then I've got them, and then we can start.
Brilliant, excellent. So this is one methodology that he's taught you, right? So what we did, we call this the DOL of learning. The first dimension of learning is EQ, where we have actually documented more than 8,000 activities a teacher needs to do in that first 30 seconds inside a classroom before she can begin her classroom. Which means the EQ to the hook, you have to catch the fish, you have to get the child's attention. So what did we do? We built what we say, engage, excite, and encourage. That's what E stands for, right? Once you've hooked the child you've trapped him into you, then what do? You take him on a journey of discovering. What is the discovery you do? So you do an activity, you can do, so this is where your visual, auditory, kinesthetic, all the stuff that we learn in our pedagogy and in our so-called stuff. So you discover, do, and you document. Now, document is a critical aspect in the Indian system. If you do not write, no education happens in our country. Which is a fact, right? So all my systems have no homework. I have not built in any homework in any of my system, and that homework is not writing homework. Okay, so parents come to me and all PTMs, I'm like the villain in the whole piece, and people will come and say, you don't give homework. I mean, we pay you fees and you don't give homework. And I look at them and I say, so you need another babysitter? Are you watching a TV serial? Because homework today is only a babysitter. Right? Mommy has to watch a serial. And baby has to sit for an hour and has to copy. Right? And does any of you know how homework emerged? Can I deviate? Anybody knows how this concept of homework emerged? Yes. Yeah, that's there. But actually, formal way of saying homework needs to be given. It's a very interesting story. I'll just deviate for 1 minute. You know the age of the Russian and the American Cold War? You all remember that era? Yes? So Russia was very smart and intelligent, and it took out its first rocket in space called Sputnik. Right? You would know, right? So who got upset? The Americans. They couldn't digest the fact that the Americans got beaten by the Russians. And they came out with the spacecraft, the Sputnik. So they did an investigation in their country and they said, what could be the reason that the Russians have beaten us at this? And their researchers came back with an amazing explanation. Their explanation was that the Russian education system is very good. It does a lot of drilling and a lot of and whatever they can't finish, there are a lot of drills happens in the class. And because of the drilling that happens in the Russian system, the people are able to invent and do things faster. This was the logic given to the government of America. And who bought the idea? The American government. And trust me, there was no Donald Trump then. Okay? They still bought the idea. Right? And what happened? All the pedagogies of free learning, Froebel and John Dewey and, project work and learning in, a natural environment, all that went down the drain because the Americans turned around and said simply, if you can't get your children to study more, give them homework to do at home. Ladies and gentlemen, we follow the Cold War syndrome even today in our... Interesting, isn't it? How politics affects education. How even the smallest things affect education in the world.
You keep them quiet at home. They don't roam around, create mischief as well.
They need to do that because according to our Vedas, there are 4 gurus. Am I right? So who's the first? First guru of the child? Mother. Second guru? Teacher. Third guru? The friends, the circle, the society, the places we live in. Who's the 4th guru then? Your own experiences. What you experience yourself is your 4th guru. What does education come down to? Just the second, the teacher, which means 25%, 25%, 25%, 25% to each needed to be given to make sure that all 4 gurus play a critical part in education. Today we have only 1 guru because the parents believe that they are paying you and therefore they have outsourced parenting. They have outsourced the child to you. So unfortunately, this is the education system. So this was what was created. And this concept and this thought came from the time that I was doing my classes with Vladimir. So I give him a lot of credit for this. And it came from the D we went on to A. So when we said, what does A mean? You've documented it. I'm sorry I deviated, but... So when you documented it, when you wrote it down, now what do? How do you reach the consciousness that we are talking of? How does that consciousness get achieved? Does it happen through Mananan? Does it happen to Chintan? Does it happen through being isolated from reaching an emotion and reaching an intellect? Are you away from it? Do we teach our children this in our classrooms? Do we teach children how to reach that realm of thinking, of creativity, or that realm of reaching beyond just getting obsessed with learning content? So that is when we put in an aspect of assimilate, analyze, and apply. And the most important, that is where we felt, and all this stemmed from the fact, from using your 5 senses. So the first E and the D was based on the 5 senses. Use your 5 senses to learn. The integral system, the paradigm system that we talk of, the 5 senses to learn, follow it with mananan, chintan, chit, intellect. Use your intellect, assimilate. Once you've got those through, you've picked it up, you've now analyze it. Take it to a higher level of thinking and move it to nidhyasana. Move it to a level of creativity and going beyond. Now, I don't know how to go beyond, so I had to unfortunately stop it to the creative level. My spiral is still in the make. I don't know how to take this spiral ahead. I'd love to take this to the next level. But so what did I do on a practical level? So this is philosophy. The only deviation I said I will not talk philosophy was this. How did I bring this into the classroom? So what did I do? I realized that the hook for students in the classroom, what do children like to do? They like to play games. Every child likes to play a game. It's a natural psychological phenomena. So we created for grade 1 to grade 5, for every topic and every subject, we created a board game. Which means the E happens through a board game. You learn fractions through a board game. You learn BODMAS through a board game. You learn geographical environment through a board game. You learn nouns through a board game. You learn everything through a board game. Okay, and when they were using the board game, there are a lot of other playing things that we introduced, which also involve the 5 senses. Right? And then, of course, we took it to the next level where you said you cannot teach, but I always believe there has to be a structure. There has to be a process to build and take you to that level. And I completely agree with the person who spoke before me about the processes and systems. Right? So what did we do? We sort of created projects for everything that you had learned. For example, I'll give you a simple example. You've all learned simple thing like a noun. You all know what a noun is? Hello? I know it's late in the afternoon, I've spoken too much, but what is a noun? A teacher will always remain a teacher. What is a noun, lesbian? And it's not a tricky question, it's a simple question. What is a noun? Huh? Name, place, animal, thing. This is the basic thing that you learn. So assume, why do you all learn nouns in school? If you were not taught nouns, would you still know nouns? Yes. But why do we learn nouns then?
For living.
For living, okay. Because it's part of the syllabus. Actually, that's the truth. We all have to give an exam at the end of it. So we make our children learn the nouns. But okay, so let's move out from that and say, okay, so where do we apply nouns on a day-to-day basis? Simple questions, no tricky answers, honestly. There's a no trick question. Where do we apply nouns? Everywhere. How will you tell a child you apply it everywhere? How will he remember it? So we used to play this game called name, place, animal thing on our desk. You remember it? So we took it to a next level. All we said, so to make children between short-term memory and long-term memory. Like my daughter, the minute she got a 98% in science in her board exam, she came out and everybody looked at her and said, oh my God, you're going to take science. And she said, what rubbish. I just learnt it and I've given it, it's over. I don't even know a thing about science. Right? She got a 98%. This is education in our country, right? So, again, question, how will you make sure long-term versus short-term? So what we did, we simple thing like a noun, we told children, go home, get a passport from home. Come home to the school and create a passport. I'm giving you one example out of the 800 examples we have. So come back home, Get a passport, get a Xerox of it, get whatever, come to your project book, create a passport. Now fill the passport. Every word in the passport is a noun. Have you ever analyzed that? Every word. Name, place, date of birth. Every word. Which country you want last visited, which country do you want to go, is a noun. So what we just did, we made education application based. And then we moved to the next level of making them think, chintan, mananan. Now tell us how later on in life, 10 years from now when you leave school, where is this noun going to help you? How can you change the definition of noun? Build something out of this noun which brings value into the country. So we build that into the next layer is what we built. So while I said that we took it to the creation level, we still have that spiral to go on, and I really need guidance and I need help to maybe go on to get into an evolutionary stage, or to maybe take my own personal journey to create something which is even more meaningful and more beautiful. So I'm not going to take much time. I've got a lot of systems that we have worked on. I'm going to not take you through any of this now. There's a lot that we have worked. But if there's any questions that anybody would like to ask me, I'll leave the floor open now. Yes. We have Wi-Fi now? Okay. We have Wi-Fi now. Questions? No?
Can I say 2 words?
Yes.
The word experience you mentioned is so important because experience has a Latin root to suffer. Without suffering, we will not grow. Oscar Wilde says, where there is suffering, there's holy ground. Dostoevsky's suffering is the sole origin of consciousness, and so on. And the second one is to play. In Japanese language, there's a beautiful word, asobu. When I ask Japanese, they only know one definition. It means to play, but it means leisure time. Scrolling means leisure time in Greek, but the leisure time I use in order to study, and it means to study under a teacher, playing and teaching together. And the last one, very interesting for me, I've heard your uncle has died, I've heard your uncle has played death. That's so easy. Thank you.
Oh, very nice.
Thank you very much, Bindu, for wonderful, inspiring talk. We are looking for these methodologies, and we are really thinking how to make it work. And there is this kind of application which is life-based, which is taking into account everybody's needs and so on. There are 2 ways to proceed with our further program. We can do it afternoon, which would be better most probably, and not to...
I can tell you that I don't want to listen to myself speak.
Huh?
I don't want to have to listen to myself speak now.
What?
So, because we've been through a lot and it's lunchtime, so
Okay.
I think it's much better for us to...
Or we can continue now and make it in half an hour. There's a second speaker. Oh, no? It's already too much. People say in this such inspirational talk that most probably I'm leaving to you. We can do it afternoon because we have extra time.
Feel that they've all gone to sleep and they want to break. That's what it makes me feel.
All right, about the session. Do you have questions? Please.
Okay, thank you for your talk. There were a couple of questions that I had. One was, over the last 2 days, I've been hearing a lot about how we may change the pedagogic process from teaching to learning and shift the focus to the learner. And often when you talk of the learner, there are differences among learners, right? Those differences can be individual. They can be in terms of individual abilities or individual psychologies and so on. But how do you accommodate systemic differences, right? So learners can have systemic differences among them, differences of gender, differences of region, differences of language. And I, as a teacher, often observe that my female students are not as confident as my male students because that's how they've been taught, that the men are better. So how do you address that or accommodate that? That's one. And the other thing that, this is a question that I'm asking from my own interest.
Can I answer? Because I have a tendency of forgetting. I have a bad memory. So if you asked me 3 questions, I would have forgotten the first 2. So, we always fall into this trap of saying that somebody's come into our system. I work with a lot of children with special needs. I'm a special educator. So I used to work a lot with children with, I'm just giving you an analogy of answering that question. So when I worked with children with special needs, I realized that these children, though were very cognitively very intelligent and were very bright and only physically not able to function, but what brought them down was an attitude problem. The attitude of the facilitator in the classroom. So the facilitator would walk in, though she was very so-called empathizing or sympathizing or whatever, she'd walk into the classroom and she would say, "Oh, Ravi, you sit properly, okay? Everybody, don't trouble Ravi." Now that's her way of sympathizing, okay? What is the connotation that Ravi has got from this, and what is the perception others have got? Ravi is somebody in the class that is special and has to be handled very delicately, and therefore needs to be treated differently. Okay. Now watch another teacher walk into a classroom and says, "Ravi, take out your books, and so will everybody else, and nobody's going to help Ravi, he's going to do his own work." What happens?
Resistance.
2 different dimensions, right? Now Ravi needs help. Ravi really actually at that point of time needs help. What have you done? You've again isolated him. Right? So, first case, you've isolated him through sympathy. Second case, you've isolated him by being non-sympathetic. Right? Third case, you walk into class, Ravi is like any other student. Why do you refer to Ravi? The minute you see she needs help, don't you go to her? The similar way, when Ravi needs help, you go to Ravi. Now, why am I giving this analogy out of context here? In our classrooms, how does the teacher handle any systemic thing? Because she makes it very conscious, she makes it an aspect of knowing that she makes things worse for the child. If we, to a large extent, ignore and we start giving responsibility to a girl in the classroom, we don't need to highlight it, "Oh, I'm giving it to you because you're a woman." You just distribute the work in the classroom and manage it in such a way that it happens. So we do a training session with our teachers on how to handle gender. There is a specific 4-hour session we do with our teachers to handle gender disequality in our classrooms, because we face that in our schools in it. So too much emphasis, less emphasis. Again, I'm coming to that core, detach from the issue and look at it and treat it like you would treat any other thing. Too much emphasis not to be given to it. I mean, that's been our personal experience. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned about value education. How have you approached value education? What are the values you are introducing or living?
So every chapter, every aspect, like I spoke about SLS, for example, the aspects. So wherever we have industries put in, we have these small-scale industries merged into the classroom. Along with that, we have a project which is given to the kids. Now, in the projects, we put in a lot of ifs and buts questions in it. So imagine that you're making agarbatti in a classroom, and while making agarbatti in the classroom, the smell actually got into a breathing problem for the child. Okay? Or that you're doing carpentry work, and one of the kids' hands has got cut. What is it that you will do to still ensure that the product goes out on time? So these tricky questions are put inside. We don't teach it. We watch for children's response to that, and then with each response that we get, the teacher is told to get on a one-to-one basis with the kids. If she feels anything dramatically, like for example, if the child has written, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll take him to a hospital and finished. Right? He didn't do anything else. That's when we realize that we need to take the child to the next level of making him understand what should be the next aspect of doing it. So it's integrated, but it is not separated. You getting what I'm saying? Which means we don't focus and say that this is value education. It's part of it.
But then being institution yourself, being an educational institution yourself, what are the values you aspire to impart in that educational systems? Are there some, because and also when you were approaching this value education in that education systems, obviously value express themselves in conducts.
So like I
what
said,
are the essence of those values? Just for me to have an understanding.
In today's system, to me, the most important value today is honesty, which seems to be a diminishing factor in our world today. And we believe that it's okay to lie. We've also taught our kids that it's okay to lie, right? So to me, honesty is, and even when I deal with my own product, or when I'm thinking and I'm conceptualizing, to me it's a journey of being even honest to myself to create the product, right? So I think to a large extent, like I said, it is caught, not taught. So when I exemplify this honesty of thinking inside my team, I encourage my team members to think like this, and I also encourage the trainers to pass this on to things. It takes time, but I think the journey, at least it's begun. I wouldn't say it's there, but like I said, it's just a journey, and I can do only what I can do to a limited extent. Yes, sir. Okay.
There's an educational value system, just like there is a spiritual or a psychological value system. So the kinds of questions that she was asking stimulate something that is called thinking out of the box. And so if the student is stimulated to think out of the box, think creatively, or cooperate with another student in order to achieve a result, or recognize a problem without being told up front what the problem is, just to give enough information that the student on their own recognizes that there's a problem and perhaps comes up with a solution to the problem. So these are institutionalized educational values. And the constructivist system that she's presenting incorporates many of those, but they're not what we've been talking about as values. But they're extremely important.
Thank you. That was well expressed. I'm going to use this the next time someone asks me the question.
So I would call it educational norms.
Any other questions? No. Yeah.
I've been trying for a while, so
Oh, all right. Okay.
people keep hijacking the mic, but I will
Okay.
hold on to it this time. I'll preface what I'm going to say with a bit of context, and this may, I'm sure to many of you this is not. I'm sure to many of you this is not new information, but it may be useful to know. We're always tempted to think that the that the schooling system is something which has always existed. It's such a prevalent part of the way we think about childhood, but it's a relatively recent phenomenon, and its roots in the way that it exists now were largely came out of the military, sort of the professionalization of the military in Prussia, which is why it's sometimes called Prussian schooling or Napoleonic schooling. But really, factory schooling is probably a better term, because the real thrust which drove it forward was very economically motivated, and a part of that was helping people to think in a more disintegrated way so that they could adapt to what industrial economics required of them. And a big part of it was supporting the stratification of society in a class system which required a slightly broader number of economic classes than...
Question to the lady. You're talking to the lady?
No, I'm talking to everybody. And so I just need to get back where I was. Right, a system which required more levels of stratification than just serfdom did. And I think that the effect of that has been felt acutely in colonial societies, where education was used as a mechanism of mass oppression. And so my concern is, and I'm not saying that this is what you're saying at all, but when I see this kind of research, which is based on classifying people and the types of education which should be made available to them based on economic indicators, I feel that we're in danger of systemically entrenching that kind of thinking around education. Whereas the reality is that there are pockets of stupidity and brilliance across all types of economic bands. And economics, of course, privilege limits people's choice and gives them access. But it's one of many factors. There's immense complexity to take into account here. And I think within the Indian tradition, even in the last century, there are numerous examples like Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, like Rabindranath Tagore, many others that pick this up in a different way. And I think there are examples coming out of post-colonial societies, things like Paulo Freire's critical education. And I think in contemporary India, movements like Shikshanta, like Namabhoomi, like Butterflies Project in Delhi. There are many of them, many of which I do not know. So I realize there's not really a defined question there, but there's a kind of concern that I'm getting at, and I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to that, maybe.
May I just, I had another question that will follow quite well from what you just said. So if I could just add to the second question that I had wanted to raise was, since when did education become equivalent or coterminous with the school or university? With the school or the university. Because, as he was saying, this is a rather recent phenomenon, even in India. And as post-colonial societies, we have inherited this. But if you look at traditional communities of knowledge, they teach and learn too. For instance, the community of weavers who weave Kanjivaram saris have a certain kind of knowledge which they then transmit to the children within their community, and that's how the art or the craft persists and is preserved. So you have all kinds of teaching and learning, traditional knowledge systems in India, and somehow with the modern period, the colonial period, education becomes the school. And with it also comes a certain idea of childhood which was historically not always there, that children should not work, for instance. I mean, prior to the modern period, children would work. But with the coming of the modern period, you get all these ideas both of childhood and what it means to be educated. And whether we like it or not, although we say we do not want to introduce a top-down system of teaching, and I know and I teach you, invariably there is this top-down understanding in the system of education, that you are the student who comes from a village who is dirty and who, we have to teach you these things. Whereas they may have traditional knowledges which are going to get completely erased in the years to come, the more the system grows.
So while I agree with both of you, I think where the gap in maybe my explaining this, and I think he's asked the question and disappeared. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so while I completely agree with you, that we all have to begin on a certain base. Now that base has to be, in research, it has to be based on a certain stratification, or it has to be based on a certain categorization, right? Now research has to begin from somewhere. Now, it's not necessary that I enjoyed doing a socio-economic thing, but that was the reality that came to me. That's my reality. Because I work in schools and I work on a day-to-day basis with at least 25,000 children around the country. Okay? And with 25,000 children come at least 20,000 parents who knock on my door virtually every day in some form or the other, right? Now, to give them the luxury of not getting into a conventional mode and to even shifting them from there to believe that children need to be left alone to learn is a difficult task. That is why today Auroville doesn't have thousands of kids studying here. It's a reality. Shikshantar doesn't have thousands of children learning there. If you want to reach out to thousands and millions of children who are in the most horrible conditions of education, I think we've achieved a lot. We have brought that education to that type and a different kind of education to children. At least we've moved one step up, which means we are giving a generation to now start thinking on a higher level. So to me, that is a credit to not me, but to my team who has struggled for 15 years, got their hands dirty, gone down on the, literally on the bunkers and started to do this. But I would like to end this with a little story, a story from the Ramayana, okay, which is exactly how I'm feeling right now, and I'll end it with that. You all know who wrote the Ramayana, right? Bad GK in this classroom. Valmiki, okay? I will give you the answer. But so Valmiki wrote the Ramayana, am I right? Yeah, it's written by many, but it's considered Ramayana, compiled by Valmiki, right? So while Valmiki was compiling and finishing the Ramayana, I hope it has a reference to my answer. And that's how I'm feeling right now. While Ramayana was being compiled, our man Narad walked into his courtyard and said, "What are you doing, Valmiki?" He said, "Oh, you know what? I've written the most amazing story. The story that I've written, people for centuries, till life doesn't end, will remember me." So Narad said, "Really? So let me read your story." So as gods in our country have supersonic powers, he just picked it up, read it, put the book down and said, "It's okay." He said, "What do you mean it's okay?" He said, "I know of somebody who's written the Ramayana better than you." He says, "How can somebody write the Ramayana better than me? How dare somebody write the Ramayana better than me?" He said, "Okay, tell me who's written it." He said, "Hanuman has written the Ramayana." He says, "What do you mean Hanuman has written the Ramayana?" He says, "Why don't you come with me? I will show you Hanuman's Ramayana." So he went, both of them go across and they go to Hanuman to read the Ramayana. So as soon as they enter, of course, Valmiki is fretting and fuming and says, comes straight to the point the minute he sees Hanuman and says, "I heard you wrote the Ramayana, I would like to read it." So Hanuman brings out his Ramayana and he hands it over to him and he says, "Read it." So Valmiki sits and he starts reading the Ramayana. And when he's reading the Ramayana, a certain transformation happens in him and he starts crying. He starts crying with every page that he is reading. And then he puts the fork down and he says, "Oh my God, your Ramayana is even better than my Ramayana. And from today, nobody will read my Ramayana." Right? Now, as it is in our Indian culture, Atiti Deva Bhavo, which means the guest is a god. And you cannot make the guest unhappy. So Hanuman picked up his Ramayana and he tore it. And he tore it and he threw it. And Narad was surprised. he said, my God, the same story. Two of you wrote the same story. Why is it that your Ramayana, Hanuman, makes him cry? Okay, and made him so upset. He said, well, there's a difference. The difference is that when Valmiki wrote the story, he felt that for centuries people should remember him. When I wrote the Ramayana, I wrote it with the intention that the world would remember Ram. Okay? That is my intention when I wrote all of this. And my intention was that every child, whatever little bit I can give them, they're able to do that. So I hope that answers the question.